The rain battered the windshield of Ethan's old pickup truck, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing inside him. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as the neon lights of a roadside diner flickered in the distance. He was 26, and tonight, he'd learn if love could survive the truth or if it was just another debt he'd been paying. Ethan Parker had always been the dependable one. Growing up in a small Ohio town, he was the son who fixed leaks, mowed lawns, and sent money home when his parents' bills piled up. He came out at 19, heart pounding, expecting rejection from his conservative family. To his shock, they hugged him, said they loved him, and called him brave. His mother, Linda, even baked his favorite lemon cake that night, tears in her eyes as she promised unconditional support. His father, Tom, gruff but kind, clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You're still our boy." Ethan believed them. He wanted to. For years, he sent money, hundreds at first, then thousands covering their mortgage, car repairs, even his sister Jenna's college tuition. He worked double shifts as a graphic designer in Chicago, living in a cramped studio to keep his family afloat. They called him their rock, their hero. But love, Ethan was starting to learn, could come with strings. Last month, everything changed. Ethan lost his biggest freelance client, a tech startup that went under. His savings dwindled, and for the first time in years, he couldn't send the usual check home. The phone calls started first curious, then sharp. "You okay, honey?" Turned into, "We're counting on you, Ethan." When he explained his situation, the warmth in his mother's voice cooled. His father stopped calling altogether. Jenna texted, "You're letting us down." Ethan stared at his phone, heart sinking. Was their acceptance tied to his wallet? He met Caleb at a Chicago art gallery 6 months ago, a chance encounter that felt like fate. Caleb, with his warm brown eyes and quiet laugh, was a barista and aspiring poet who saw Ethan's heart before his bank account. They fell hard, spending late nights talking about dreams, fears, and the families they both wanted to make proud. Caleb's family, devout and unyielding, had cut him off when he came out. "At least yours love you," Caleb said once, squeezing Ethan's hand. Ethan hadn't corrected him. He wasn't ready to admit the cracks in his family's acceptance. Tonight, Ethan drove through the rain to meet Caleb at their favorite diner. He needed to tell him everything about the money, the silence from home, the gnawing fear that his family's love was conditional. Caleb deserved the truth, even if it meant exposing the shame Ethan carried. As he pulled into the diner's lot, his phone buzzed. A text from his mother, "We need $500 by Friday. Don't let us down." Ethan's throat tightened. He turned off the engine and sat in the dark, the rain a steady drum against his world falling apart. Inside, Caleb was already at their usual booth, nursing a coffee. His curls caught the diner's soft light, and his smile faltered when he saw Ethan's face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Caleb said, sliding a menu across the table. Ethan forced a laugh, but it cracked. He wanted to spill everything, but the words felt like stones in his mouth. "Family stuff," Ethan said finally, staring at his hands. Caleb reached across, his fingers brushing Ethan's. "Talk to me," he said softly. And so, Ethan began, haltingly at first, then in a rush about the years of checks, the promises of love, the sudden coldness when the money stopped. Caleb listened, his eyes steady, his hand never leaving Ethan's. "They said they accepted me," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "But what if it was all a lie? Caleb didn't answer right away. He squeezed Ethan's hand tighter, his silence a promise to stay through the storm. As they left the diner, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Ethan felt lighter, but the weight wasn't gone. He knew he had to confront his family, to ask the question he'd been avoiding: did they love him? Or his money? Caleb walked him to his truck, their shoulders brushing. "Whatever happens," Caleb said, "you're not alone." Ethan nodded, holding onto those words like a lifeline. Back in Chicago, Ethan's apartment felt smaller than ever. He sat at his desk, staring at a photo of his family from last Christmas, smiling, arms around each other. He'd paid for that trip, too. The memory stung. He opened his laptop and started drafting an email to his parents, fingers trembling. "I need to know," he typed, "if you love me for me, or for what I can give you." He didn't send it. Not yet. The next day, Caleb came over, bringing coffee and a poem he'd written about resilience. They talked for hours, and Ethan felt something shift, a spark of courage. He wasn't just fighting for his family's love. He was fighting for himself, for the life he wanted with Caleb, for a future where love didn't come with a price tag. But the road ahead was uncertain, and Ethan knew the hardest battles were still to come. "My family said they accepted me for being gay until I stopped paying their bills." Ethan stared at the unsent email on his laptop screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The words were raw, exposing a wound he'd carried for weeks. "Do you love me for me, or for what I can give you?" He hovered over the send button, his stomach twisting. What if their answer broke him? Caleb was sprawled on Ethan's couch, scribbling in his notebook, his presence a quiet anchor. "You don't have to send it today," Caleb said, glancing up. "But you need to say it eventually. For you." Ethan nodded, closing the laptop. Caleb was right, but the fear of losing his family's fragile acceptance kept him frozen. The next morning, Ethan's phone rang. It was Jenna, his younger sister, her voice sharp through the static. "Mom's freaking out about the electric bill," she said without preamble. "Why haven't you sent anything?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I told you. I'm stretched thin right now." Jenna huffed. "You always figure it out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She hung up, leaving Ethan staring at his phone, anger simmering. He'd paid for her textbooks last semester. Did that mean nothing? He drove to work, the Chicago skyline a blur of steel and glass. His design job was demanding, but the lost client had cut his income in half. He'd been taking on smaller gigs, but they barely covered his rent. At lunch, he checked his bank account, $217.43. Not enough for his own bills, let alone his family's. He texted Caleb, "I can't keep doing this." Caleb replied instantly, "Then don't. Come over tonight." At Caleb's tiny apartment, the air smelled of fresh coffee and old books. Caleb was cooking pasta, humming softly, and for a moment, Ethan forgot the weight on his shoulders. Over dinner, Caleb shared stories of his own family's rejection, how they'd called his sexuality a sin, how he'd built a new life without their approval. "It hurts," Caleb said, twirling his fork. "But I found people who love me for me. You will too." Ethan wanted to believe him, but the thought of losing his family entirely felt like a knife to the chest. The next day, Ethan called his mother. "I can't send money right now," he said, voice steady despite his racing heart. Linda's pause was heavy. "Ethan, we rely on you. You know that." Her tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. "I'm trying," Ethan said, But I need to know you're there for me, too. Not just my money. Linda sighed. Of course we love you. Don't be dramatic. The call ended, and Ethan felt hollow. Her words didn't feel like love, they felt like dismissal. That evening, Caleb took Ethan to an open mic night at a local bookstore. Caleb read a poem about finding home in someone else's heart. His eyes locked on Ethan. The crowd applauded, but Ethan barely heard them. He was thinking about his parents' house, the one he'd helped pay for, and how it no longer felt like home. After the reading, Caleb pulled him outside. You're enough, Caleb said, his breath visible in the chilly air. You don't have to buy their love. Ethan's eyes stung. He wanted to believe it, but doubt clung to him like damp clothes. Back home, Ethan reopened the email. He added a line, I'm coming home this weekend. We need to talk in person. He hit send before he could overthink it. The response came hours later. A curt, okay from his father. Ethan's heart sank, but there was no turning back. The drive to Ohio was 6 hours, and Ethan spent it rehearsing what he'd say. Caleb had offered to come, but Ethan needed to face this alone. As he crossed the state line, memories flooded back: family barbecues, his mother's hugs, his father teaching him to drive. Were those moments real, or had they always been transactional? He pulled into his parents' driveway at dusk. The house looked smaller, the paint peeling. His mother greeted him at the door, her smile strained. You didn't have to come all this way, she said, avoiding his eyes. His father was in the living room, watching TV, barely acknowledging him. Jenna was upstairs, her door closed. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't the welcome he'd hoped for. Over dinner, the tension was suffocating. Ethan tried to explain his financial struggles, but his father cut him off. We've always supported you, Ethan, even when you chose this life. The words hit like a slap. Chose this life. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. You said you accepted me, he said, voice low. Was that only because I was paying for everything? The room went silent. His mother looked away, and his father's jaw tightened. Ethan's heart pounded, waiting for an answer that didn't come. The silence in the dining room was louder than any argument. Ethan's question hung in the air: was that only because I was paying for everything? And his parents' refusal to answer carved a deeper wound than words could. He pushed his chair back, the scrape against the floor echoing his frustration, and walked out to the porch. The Ohio night was crisp, stars piercing the dark sky, but Ethan felt like he was suffocating. His mother followed him outside, her footsteps hesitant. Ethan, don't make this bigger than it is, Linda said, wrapping her cardigan tighter. We love you. We've always loved you. But her eyes darted away, and Ethan saw the truth she wouldn't say. Their love had terms, and he'd broken them. Then why does it feel like I'm only your son when I'm paying your bills? He asked, voice cracking. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it, retreating back inside without a word. Ethan spent the night in his old bedroom, the walls still plastered with posters from his teenage years. He lay awake, replaying every check he'd sent. Every "we're proud of you" that now felt hollow. By morning, he knew he couldn't stay. He needed answers, but he also needed to protect himself. He texted Caleb, "It's worse than I thought. Heading back soon." Caleb's reply was instant. "I'm here. Always." At breakfast, his father barely looked up from his coffee. Jenna, scrolling on her phone, muttered about needing money for a new laptop. Ethan's patience snapped. "I'm not a bank," he said, louder than he meant. I've given everything I have. And it's never enough. His father slammed his mug down. Watch your tone. Ethan. We've done plenty for you. Ethan laughed bitterly. Like what? Accepting me as long as I keep paying. The argument escalated. Voices rising until Jenna stormed out and Tom retreated to the garage. Linda just cried, saying, "We're a family. Ethan, don't tear us apart." He left that afternoon. The drive back to Chicago a blur of anger and grief. Caleb was waiting at his apartment, arms open, and Ethan collapsed into them, tears finally spilling. "They don't see me," he whispered. "They see a paycheck." Caleb held him, murmuring, "You're more than that. You're everything." For the first time, Ethan started to believe it. The next week was a whirlwind. Ethan took on extra freelance work, scraping by to cover his own bills. He ignored his family's calls, each one a reminder of their expectations. But the silence gave him space to think, to question what family really meant. He and Caleb spent evenings together, cooking, laughing, planning a future that felt like freedom. Caleb's poetry became their soundtrack, each line a reminder that love could be unconditional. One night, Ethan got a voicemail from his mother. "We're struggling, Ethan," she said, her voice small. "We didn't mean to hurt you. Please call." He listened to it 3 times, torn between guilt and resolve. Caleb sat beside him, not pushing, just there. "What do you want?" Caleb asked. Ethan didn't know. He wanted his family, but not the version that demanded his sacrifice. He drafted a new email. This time firm, "I love you, but I can't be your ATM anymore. If you want me in your life, it has to be for me, not my money." He sent it, heart racing, and waited. Days passed with no reply. The silence was deafening, but it also felt like a release. He wasn't begging for their love anymore, was demanding it on his terms. Caleb took him to a queer community center that weekend, a place where people shared stories of chosen families. Ethan listened to others who'd faced rejection, who'd built new lives from the ashes of old ones. He felt a spark of hope. Maybe he could do this, too. Maybe love didn't have to hurt. But late that night, his phone lit up with a text from Jenna, "You're selfish. We're losing the house." Ethan's stomach dropped. He showed Caleb, expecting sympathy. But Caleb's eyes were fierce. "They're manipulating you," he said. "Don't let them pull you back." Ethan nodded, but the guilt was a heavy stone. He loved his family, flaws and all. Could he really walk away? Ethan couldn't sleep. Jenna's text burning in his mind, "You're selfish. We're losing the house." Each word was a hook, pulling him back to the role he'd played for years: provider, fixer, the son who never said no. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the photo of his family on his nightstand, their smiles now a question mark. Caleb was asleep beside him, his breathing steady, a reminder of the life Ethan was trying to build. He slipped out of bed and paced the apartment, the Chicago skyline glittering beyond his window. He wanted to call Jenna, to promise he'd find a way. But Caleb's words echoed, "They're manipulating you." Ethan opened his banking app, $189. 12. Even if he wanted to help, he couldn't. The next morning, Caleb found him at the kitchen table, head in his hands. "You didn't sleep," Caleb said. Not a question. Ethan shook his head. "They're my family, Caleb. I can't just let them lose everything." Caleb knelt beside him, eyes soft but firm. "You're not their savior. You're their son." They need to figure this out without you. Ethan wanted to argue, but the truth in Caleb's words was undeniable. He decided to call his mother. The phone rang 4 times before Linda answered, her voice weary. "Ethan, we're in trouble," she said. "The bank's threatening foreclosure." Ethan's heart sank, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't have the money. I've been drowning, too." There was a long pause. "We thought you were doing fine," she said, almost accusingly. Ethan bit back a retort. "I'm trying to survive. I need you to see that." Linda promised to talk to his father, but the call ended with no resolution. Ethan threw himself into work, taking every gig he could find: logos, website mock-ups, even a rush job for a local bakery. The extra cash helped, but it wasn't enough to ease the guilt gnawing at him. Caleb noticed, pulling him into long walks along Lake Michigan, where they talked about dreams bigger than money. "What if we moved in together?" Caleb asked one evening, the sunset painting the water gold. Ethan's heart skipped. "You mean it?" Caleb grinned. "I'm all in." "Ethan, are you?" For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt like he could breathe. But the relief was short-lived. A letter arrived from his parents' bank, addressed to him as a guarantor on their mortgage, a detail he'd forgotten in the haze of helping them years ago. If they defaulted, his credit would take the hit. Panic surged. He called his father, who admitted they'd missed payments. "We thought you'd cover it," Tom said, his tone flat. Ethan's anger flared. "I told you I can't. Why didn't you tell me about this?" Tom hung up, leaving Ethan reeling. He showed Caleb the letter, his hands shaking. "This could ruin me," he said. Caleb read it, then set it down. "We'll figure it out together." They spent hours researching options: loan modifications, legal aid, anything to protect Ethan. The community center connected them with a lawyer who specialized in financial disputes, offering pro bono advice. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start. Ethan wrote to his parents again, this time with a plan. "I'll help you find resources, but I can't pay. Please meet me halfway." He didn't expect a reply, but 2 days later, Jenna called. "Mom and Dad are trying," she said, softer than before. "They're just scared." Ethan wanted to believe her, but trust was a fragile thing. That weekend, Caleb took Ethan to a queer film festival, a distraction from the chaos. They watched a movie about a man rebuilding his life after family rejection, and Ethan saw himself in every frame. Afterward, they walked through the city, hand in hand, and Ethan realized something. He was choosing himself, maybe for the first time. Caleb was his family now, not because of obligation, but because of love. But as they returned to Ethan's apartment, a voicemail from his father waited. "We're selling the house. Come home. We need to talk." Ethan's stomach dropped. He looked at Caleb, who nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Ethan knew this trip would be different. This time, he wasn't going to beg for their love, was going to demand their respect. Ethan's truck rumbled down the familiar Ohio highway, the weight of his father's voicemail pressing against his chest. "We're selling the house. Come home." The words felt final, like a door slamming shut on the life he'd tried to hold together. Caleb sat beside him, his hand resting on Ethan's knee, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone. The drive was long, and Ethan's mind churned with memory: summers in the backyard, his mother's laughter, the way his father used to call him champ. But those memories clashed with the present, the cold calls, The guilt trips. The realization that his family's love might have always been tied to his sacrifices. Caleb broke the silence. You don't owe them your life, Ethan. Just your truth. Ethan nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. When they arrived, the house looked tired. The for sale sign in the yard a stark admission of defeat. Linda met them at the door, her eyes red. You brought Caleb, she said, her tone unreadable. Ethan nodded. He's my family, too. She didn't reply, just led them inside. Tom was at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, bills, bank statements, a realtor's contract. Jenna sat on the stairs, watching silently. Ethan introduced Caleb, his voice steady despite the tension. Tom shook Caleb's hand, but his eyes stayed cold. Let's get to it, Tom said, gesturing to the papers. We can't keep the house. We need your help one last time. Ethan's heart sank. He'd expected this, but it still hurt. I can't pay, he said. I've told you that. Tom's face hardened. You've always found a way before. Caleb squeezed Ethan's hand under the table, giving him strength. I'm not here to bail you out, Ethan said, meeting his father's gaze. I'm here to talk about us. About what family means. Linda looked away, twisting a napkin in her hands. Tom leaned back, arms crossed. You're our son. We accepted you, even with everything. The word everything landed like a punch. Ethan's voice shook. You accepted me as long as I paid. That's not love. That's a transaction. The room went quiet. The truth laid bare. Jenna spoke up, her voice small. We didn't mean it like that, Ethan. We needed you. Ethan turned to her, softening. I needed you, too. To see me, not my money. Linda started to cry, and Tom's jaw tightened. But he didn't argue. For the first time, Ethan felt like they were listening. Caleb stayed quiet, his presence a steady anchor. After a long pause, Linda spoke. We were wrong to lean on you so much. But we're scared. Ethan. We're losing everything. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to fix it, to slip back into the role of savior. But he couldn't. I can help you find solutions, he said. But I can't carry this anymore. They spent the evening talking. Really talking. For the first time in years. Ethan shared his struggles, his dwindling savings, his fear of losing himself. Caleb spoke, too, about his own journey, his voice calm but powerful. Linda listened, her tears slowing. Tom was harder to read, but he didn't interrupt. By the end, no one had apologized, but something had shifted. The next morning, Ethan and Caleb helped sort through the family's options, selling assets, applying for aid, even downsizing. It wasn't easy, but it felt like a step toward honesty. As they prepared to leave, Jenna hugged Ethan, whispering, I'm sorry. I didn't get it. Ethan hugged her back, tears in his eyes. I love you, he said. But I have to love me, too. On the drive back to Chicago, Ethan felt lighter, though the pain lingered. Caleb turned on the radio, a soft ballad filling the truck. You did it, Caleb said, smiling. You stood up for yourself. Ethan reached for his hand. For us, he corrected. For the first time, he believed he could build a life where love didn't come with a price. But the journey wasn't over. There were still battles to face. And Ethan knew the hardest ones were often with the people you loved most. Back in Chicago, Ethan felt the weight of the weekend settle into his bones. The conversation with his family had been a start, but it wasn't closure. The for sale sign in their yard haunted him, a symbol of everything breaking apart. He threw himself into work, designing logos late into the night. But the guilt lingered like a shadow. Caleb noticed. Over breakfast at their favorite diner, he pushed a plate of pancakes toward Ethan. "You're carrying too much," he said, his eyes searching Ethan's face. "You can't fix their mistakes." Ethan poked at his food, the syrup pooling like his thoughts. "I know, but they're still my family." Caleb reached for his hand. "Family doesn't mean you owe them everything. You're allowed to have boundaries." Ethan started seeing a therapist at the community center, a kind woman named Maria who specialized in queer family dynamics. She helped him unpack the years of giving, the way he'd tied his worth to his family's approval. "You've been their safety net," Maria said in their first session. "But who's been yours?" Ethan thought of Caleb, of the way he'd stayed through every storm. He realized he was learning what love could be steady, not demanding. Meanwhile, his parents' situation worsened. Linda called one evening, her voice shaky. "The bank's moving faster than we thought," she said. "We might have to move in with Jenna's friend's family." Ethan's heart ached, but he held firm. "I can send you resources, Mom. I've got a list from the lawyer." Linda hesitated. "We're trying, Ethan. It's just hard." For the first time, she sounded like she meant it. Ethan and Caleb began planning their move together, a small apartment in a quieter part of Chicago. They spent weekends hunting for places, laughing over mismatched furniture and dreaming of a space that was theirs. One night, as they painted sample colors on a wall, Caleb said, "This is our home, Ethan. Not just a Placia life." Ethan kissed him, paint smudged on his cheek, and felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. But the past wasn't done with him. Tom called, his voice gruff. "We sold the house. Got enough to rent a place for now." Ethan waited for the ask, but it didn't come. Instead, Tom said, "You were right. We leaned on you too much." It wasn't an apology, but it was close. Ethan's throat tightened. "I just want us to be a family again," he said. Tom was quiet. "Then, we're working on it." Ethan shared the call with Caleb, who was writing at their shared desk. "That's progress," Caleb said, smiling. "They're starting to see you." Ethan wasn't sure, but he wanted to hope. He started writing letters to his family, not emails, but handwritten ones, pouring out his feelings. He didn't expect replies, but it felt like reclaiming his voice. One evening, Jenna texted a photo of her new apartment, a tiny place she was sharing with a friend. "It's not much, but it's mine," she wrote. Ethan smiled, texting back, "Proud of you." It was small, but it felt like a bridge. He showed Caleb, who pulled him into a hug. "You're building something real," Caleb said. "With them. With us." The lawyer called with news. The bank had agreed to a payment plan, easing the pressure on Ethan's credit. It wasn't perfect, but it was a win. Ethan celebrated with Caleb at the diner, their hands linked across the table. For the first time, he felt like he was standing on solid ground. But late that night, an email from Linda arrived. "Can we visit you in Chicago? We want to try?" Ethan stared at the screen, hope and fear colliding. He showed Caleb, who nodded. "Let them come. But on your terms." Ethan agreed, knowing this visit would test everything: his boundaries, their love, and the family they could become. He typed a reply, his heart racing. Let's talk. I'd like that. As he hit send, he felt Caleb's hand on his shoulder. A promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Ethan stood in his new apartment, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the scent of Caleb's coffee. The space was small but theirs, with mismatched furniture and a view of Chicago's twinkling lights. His parents were coming tomorrow, their first visit since the house was sold, and Ethan's nerves were a live wire. He wanted to believe they could rebuild, but doubt lingered like a bruise. Caleb was arranging books on a shelf, humming softly. "You're overthinking," he said, catching Ethan's gaze. "Let them show you who they are now." Ethan nodded, but his mind raced. What if they hadn't changed? What if they still saw him as a resource, not a son? He busied himself cleaning, trying to outrun the fear. Maria, his therapist, had given him tools for the visit: set boundaries, communicate clearly, don't slip back into old roles. Ethan practiced what he'd say: "I love you, but I'm not your bank. I want us to be a family, not a transaction." The words felt right, but saying them to his parents' faces was another matter. Caleb helped, role-playing conversations until Ethan laughed despite himself. "You're tougher than you think," Caleb said, kissing his forehead. The next day, Linda and Tom arrived, looking out of place in the city. Jenna came too, her usual bravado softened. The apartment felt smaller with them in it, their presence a mix of familiarity and tension. Linda hugged Ethan, her embrace hesitant. Tom nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "Nice place," he said gruffly. Jenna smiled at Caleb, a small gesture that felt like progress. Over coffee, Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm glad you're here," he started. "But we need to talk about what family means to us." Linda's eyes welled up, and Tom shifted uncomfortably. "We've been wrong," Linda said, her voice shaky. "We leaned on you too much. We didn't see how it hurt you." Ethan waited, letting her words settle. Tom cleared his throat. "It wasn't about you being, you know. It was about surviving. But we messed up." The admission wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Ethan felt a knot loosen in his chest. "I needed you to love me for me," he said. "Not for what I could do." Jenna reached for his hand. "We do, Ethan. We're trying." The conversation wasn't easy. There were tears, awkward pauses, moments of defensiveness, but it was real. Caleb stayed close, his presence a quiet strength, stepping in when Ethan faltered. They spent the day together, walking through the city, sharing stories. Linda asked Caleb about his poetry, and Tom listened, his gruffness softening. At dinner, Jenna talked about her new job, her pride in standing on her own. Ethan saw glimpses of the family he'd missed, but he knew it would take time to rebuild trust. That night, after they left, Ethan and Caleb sat on their couch, the city humming outside. "They're trying," Ethan said, almost surprised. Caleb smiled. "So are you. That's what matters." Ethan leaned into him, feeling the weight of the day lift. He was learning to love his family without losing himself, to hold space for their flaws while building his own life. The next week, Ethan got a letter from Linda, handwritten one, like the ones he'd sent. "We're proud of you, Ethan. Not for what you give, but for who you are." Tears blurred his vision as he read it. He showed Caleb, who pulled him close. "This is what you fought for," Caleb said. Ethan nodded, knowing it wasn't the end, but a beginning. As spring bloomed in Chicago, Ethan felt himself blooming. 2. He and Caleb planned a small commitment ceremony, a celebration of their chosen family. They invited Ethan's parents and Jenna, a test of their new dynamic. Ethan wasn't sure they'd come, but he was ready to face whatever came next with Caleb. With hope, and with a love that didn't demand a price. The Chicago spring was vibrant. Cherry blossoms dusting the streets as Ethan and Caleb prepared for their commitment ceremony. Their apartment was a whirlwind of planned flowers. Vows. A playlist of songs that meant something only to them. Ethan felt a nervous joy, like standing on the edge of a new life. His family had promised to come, but doubt lingered. Would they show up for him? Not his money. The ceremony was small, held in a community garden near their apartment. Friends from the community center set up chairs, and Caleb's poetry group strung fairy lights through the trees. Ethan wore a simple suit, Caleb in a sweater that matched his eyes. As they stood together, exchanging vows, Ethan felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. "You're my home," Caleb said, his voice steady. Ethan's voice broke as he replied, "And you're mine." When he looked out at the small crowd, he saw his parents and Jenna. Linda was crying, a real smile on her face. Tom's expression was softer than Ethan had ever seen, and Jenna gave him a thumbs up. They were there not because he'd paid, but because they wanted to be. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. After the ceremony, they all gathered for a potluck dinner under the stars. Linda brought her lemon cake, a gesture that made Ethan's heart ache with memory. Tom clapped him on the shoulder, saying, "You're happy. That's what matters." Jenna pulled Ethan aside, her eyes bright. "I'm sorry for everything," she said. "I want to be better." Ethan hugged her, feeling the pieces of his family slowly coming together. Over the next months, Ethan and Caleb built their life working, laughing, dreaming. Ethan's design business picked up, giving him stability without the burden of his family's bills. His parents called regularly, not to ask for money, but to talk about their new apartment, Tom's job, Linda's garden. It was slow, sometimes awkward, but it was real. One evening, Caleb read a new poem at the bookstore, dedicated to Ethan. It spoke of love as a choice, not a debt, and Ethan felt every word in his soul. Afterward, they walked home, hand in hand, the city alive around them. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice soft. Caleb smiled. "We're doing it. Every day?" Ethan still saw Maria, working through the scars of his family's expectations. She helped him see that love could be imperfect but still worth fighting for. He wrote to his parents, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. Their replies were short but genuine, a sign they were trying. The turning point came when Linda and Tom invited Ethan and Caleb to their new place for Thanksgiving. It was a small apartment, nothing like the old house, but it felt like a home. Over dinner, Tom raised a glass. "To family," he said, looking at Ethan and Caleb. "The real kind." Ethan's eyes stung as he clinked glasses, feeling the weight of years lift. As they drove back to Chicago, Caleb squeezed Ethan's hand. "You built this," he said. Ethan shook his head. "We did." He thought of the journey, the pain, the fights, the moments of hope, and knew it was worth it. He'd found love that didn't demand his soul, a family that saw him for who he was, and a life where he could finally be free. The story wasn't over. There would be more struggles, more conversations, more steps to take. But Ethan wasn't afraid anymore. With Caleb by his side, and his family learning to love him for him. He knew he could face anything. Love, he'd learned, wasn't about paying a price, it was about choosing each other. Every day, through every storm.